The laughter echoed through the bright conference hall like a sharp blade. Every engineer in the room turned toward the old man standing near the prototype vehicle. Some smiled awkwardly. Others openly smirked. But the loudest laugh came from the woman at the center of the crowd, a powerful automotive executive whose company employed hundreds of the smartest engineers in the country. She looked at the tangled pipes, recycled metal parts, and hand-welded components attached to the vehicle and shook her head in disbelief. To her, it looked like a garage experiment. To him, it represented 20 years of sacrifice. And within the next 24 hours, that homemade fuel system would outperform everything her multi-million-dollar engineering department had ever created. Before we continue, if you believe kindness, perseverance, and second chances deserve recognition, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs inspiration today, and subscribe to Single Dad Empire for more powerful stories that touch the heart. The man standing beside the vehicle was named Rowan Mercer. At 62 years old, Rowan looked more like a retired farmer than an inventor. His faded denim shirt was neatly pressed, but worn from years of use. His hands carried scars from welding, repairing engines, and working long nights alone in a small workshop behind his house. Most people saw an ordinary man. Few knew the story behind him. 20 years earlier, Rowan had worked as a mechanical engineer for a manufacturing company. He had loved solving problems and building machines. But when the company downsized, he lost his job. Soon after, his wife became seriously ill. The savings disappeared. Medical bills piled up. Then came the day that changed everything. His wife passed away, leaving Rowan alone to raise their young daughter. For years, survival became his only goal. He worked odd jobs repairing tractors, fixing generators, and restoring old vehicles. Every dollar mattered. Every hour mattered. Yet one question never left his mind. Why were fuel systems still wasting so much energy? Every time he repaired an engine, he noticed the same inefficiencies. Fuel burned unevenly. Heat escaped unnecessarily. Tiny losses accumulated into enormous waste. Large corporations spent millions trying to improve fuel efficiency. Rowan spent nights in a workshop no larger than a garage. After putting his daughter to bed, he would sketch ideas on scraps of paper. He studied combustion patterns. He experimented with airflow designs. He reused discarded parts because he couldn't afford expensive materials. Year after year, failure followed failure. Some designs improved efficiency by 2%. Others actually made things worse. Several prototypes exploded. Many nights ended with Rowan sitting alone in darkness, wondering whether he was chasing a dream that would never come true. But every morning, he started again. His daughter, Isla, became his biggest supporter. As she grew older, she often found him asleep at his workbench, surrounded by notes and blueprints. When money was tight, she never complained. When neighbors called her father obsessed, she defended him. When others laughed at his strange inventions, she reminded him that every great breakthrough had once sounded impossible. Those words stayed with him. Years passed. Eventually Isla graduated from college and began working as a teacher. Meanwhile, Rowan continued refining his design. Then, one quiet evening, something extraordinary happened. A test engine running on his newest prototype consumed dramatically less fuel than expected. At first he thought the instruments were broken. He recalibrated everything. He repeated the test. The result was nearly identical. Then he tested again. And again. The numbers remained consistent. His homemade fuel system was reducing fuel consumption by almost 40%. 40%. The figure seemed impossible. Even Rowan struggled to believe it. For months he conducted additional tests. He documented every result. He verified every measurement. Only when he was completely certain did he submit his invention to an industry innovation conference. That decision brought him to the conference hall where people now laughed at him. The executive who laughed the hardest was Victoria Hale. Victoria was brilliant, accomplished, and respected throughout the automotive industry. She had built her company into a technological powerhouse. Her engineers possessed cutting-edge laboratories, advanced software, and research budgets larger than Rowan could imagine. When she saw his homemade prototype, she assumed it was another unrealistic invention from an amateur dreamer. The audience seemed to agree. But Rowan remained calm. He had experienced rejection before. He had lived through much worse than embarrassment. The demonstration was scheduled for the next morning. That night, while executives attended expensive dinners and networking events, Rowan sat alone in his hotel room. He stared at a photograph of his late wife and daughter. The picture was old and slightly faded. For a long time, he simply looked at it. He remembered every sacrifice. Every setback. Every lonely night in the workshop. Whatever happened tomorrow, he knew he had already honored the promise he once made to himself, to never stop trying. The following morning arrived under a bright blue sky. Engineers, investors, journalists, and executives gathered around the testing track. Sophisticated prototypes lined the area. Most had been developed by teams of experts using enormous resources. Rowan's vehicle looked humble by comparison. The testing began. One by one, vehicles completed standardized fuel efficiency runs. Results appeared on large screens. Some performed well. Others exceeded expectations. The crowd applauded politely. Then Rowan's turn arrived. Silence settled over the track. His vehicle started with a low rumble. As it moved through the course, spectators watched carefully. The run seemed ordinary. Nothing dramatic happened. No flashy displays. No futuristic technology. Just an old man and a vehicle powered by years of determination. When the test concluded, officials began analyzing the data. Minutes felt like hours. Then the final numbers appeared. At first, many people assumed there had been a mistake. The fuel consumption reduction exceeded every other prototype by a staggering margin. 40%. Exactly as Rowan had claimed. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Engineers checked calculations. Officials reviewed data repeatedly. The result remained unchanged. A second test was ordered. The outcome was nearly identical. Then a third. Again, the same. Shock replaced skepticism. The crowd that had laughed less than a day earlier now stared in disbelief. Journalists rushed forward. Investors scrambled to learn more. Engineers demanded access to the technical documentation. Among them stood Victoria Hale. For the first time, she looked at Rowan not as an amateur but as a fellow innovator. She approached him slowly. The confidence that had fueled her earlier laughter was gone. Instead, there was humility. She reviewed the design personally. The elegance of the solution amazed her. It wasn't based on expensive technology. It wasn't dependent on rare materials. The brilliance lay in its simplicity. Rowan had solved a problem everyone else had overcomplicated. Sometimes genius doesn't emerge from billion-dollar laboratories. Sometimes it emerges from a quiet workshop where determination refuses to surrender. Within weeks, major automotive companies contacted Rowan. Licensing offers arrived. Partnership proposals followed. The invention that people mocked suddenly became one of the most discussed technologies in the industry. Financially, Rowan's life changed forever. But money wasn't what moved him most. What touched him deeply was something else. Months later, after production agreements had been finalized, he visited the small workshop behind his house. The workbench remained exactly as it had been for years. Old tools rested in familiar places. Scraps of paper still covered the shelves. Dust floated through sunlight streaming from the windows. For a long moment, Rowan stood silently. He remembered the countless nights spent there alone. The failures. The doubts. The tears nobody ever saw. Then he noticed a small handwritten note taped near the workbench. It had been written years earlier by Isla. The paper was yellowed with age. The words were simple. "Dad, one day the world will see what I already see." Rowan sat down and cried. Not because he had become successful. Not because people finally respected him. But because someone had believed in him when there was no reason to. Someone had seen value in him long before the headlines, awards, and recognition arrived. That faith had carried him through the darkest years of his life. As news of his invention spread globally, Rowan often spoke to students and young inventors. He rarely discussed technical details first. Instead, he talked about perseverance. He talked about rejection. He talked about how the world often laughs before it applauds. Most importantly, he reminded people that success is not always about resources. Sometimes it is about refusing to quit after the 100th failure. Sometimes it is about continuing when nobody else believes. Sometimes it is about trusting a dream long enough for reality to catch up. If this story has touched your heart so far, please like the video, leave a comment sharing where you're watching from, and subscribe to Single Dad Empire so more people can discover stories of hope, resilience, and second chances. Special request: comment below with the words, "Never give up," if you believe persistence can change a person's destiny. Years after that famous demonstration, Rowan would often be asked what it felt like when the crowd stopped laughing. His answer never changed. He said the applause didn't matter nearly as much as the years he spent believing in himself before anyone else did. Because real victory had happened long before the conference. It happened every time he chose to continue despite failure. Every time he returned to the workshop after disappointment. Every time he ignored the voices saying it couldn't be done. The world eventually celebrated his breakthrough. But the true miracle was the man who refused to abandon it. And perhaps that's the lesson hidden inside every great success story. The people who change the world are not always the loudest, richest, or most powerful. Often, they are the quiet dreamers working alone, carrying hope through years of uncertainty. They are the ones who keep going while others laugh. The ones who keep building while others doubt. The ones who continue believing when no evidence exists that success is coming. Because sometimes, the difference between being forgotten and making history is simply having the courage to try one more time. And somewhere tonight, in a small workshop, garage, classroom, or corner of a crowded city, another dreamer may be hearing those same words of doubt. If that's you, remember Rowan Mercer. Remember the laughter. Remember the struggle. Remember the breakthrough. And remember that the world's opinion can change in a single day, but perseverance can change an entire lifetime. The crowd laughed at his homemade fuel system. Then it changed the future. And that is a story worth believing in.